Welcome to the podcast, Chris Graham and Rod Mullins, and it's Eclipse Day, and not only that, we'll talk obviously some Martinsville. But Rod, sounds like we were chatting just a minute ago before we hit record. All is well. I guess the eclipse came, but there were no plagues of locust or frogs or anything down your way. I don't think there were here either. So I guess we're okay to go on as a civilization after this.
I think so. I think there were no bodies that started descending toward the heavens or anything of that nature. So I think we're okay for right now. Not completely convinced that that's going to be the case because last week an earthquake did happen somewhere near New York, and I talked to a friend of mine who lived in Pennsylvania, about 3 hours away from New York, and I said, "Did you feel the earthquake?" Huh? What earthquake?
Earthquake.
That was their reaction, and said, "Oh, I must have felt that on the way I was traveling and stuff." So that kind of suggested to me that meant potholes and everything else. So she may have hit a pothole and experienced what she thought was, a pothole, but it may have been an earthquake, but she thought it was a pothole probably. So
Yeah,
who
that earth
knows?
that earthquake, I can't remember what year it was, the one that they called the Mineral Earthquake, Mineral,
Oh yeah,
Virginia, which is just outside of
2011,
Richmond. Yeah, 2011.
2011.
Okay.
Yep.
I was in the Outer Banks. Crystal and I were in the Outer Banks that week, and supposedly you could have felt it there, but we did not. And that one was a relatively strong one, like I
Yeah,
want to say 5.8.
5.8 was what it was. Yeah.
But still, I mean, now the Washington Monument suffered some damage, but and they had to. I think it got shut down for a while to repair that
Yep.
damage. But I remember the memes that were going on at that time. People with their like backyard plastic furniture turned over and stuff like that, and all the humanity and that kind of thing. But yeah, that New York one was 4.8, and people. I mean, you know it, I know it. We both live in the mountains, different, I guess, similar sets of mountains
hmm
in Virginia. Those mountains didn't just pop up for no reason. I mean, the Earth had to move for those mountains to come up. So, um, historically, geographically, geologically, all that stuff, that there's a reason those mountains are here.
Yep, no doubt about it. So, I mean, I remember that 2011. Uh, Never felt anything, but my wife Kim, I think they felt it out at UVA Wise. She was a student then, and the building they had out there, Commonwealth, I believe, was what the name of the hall was at that point. A lot of glass in that building, and it started kind of shaking a little bit at that point, and a lot of them were like, it's shaking. What's going on? And then it got dropped on us later on. Hey, we've had an earthquake. And a friend of mine's daughter was going to Liberty at that time, and she called and she said, "We just had an earthquake." And we were all just kind of surprised, like, what in the heck's happened with all this stuff? And so, yeah, I mean, it's a possibility anywhere you go on the planet, anything like that could happen. But I don't know. It didn't happen today though, not with the eclipse. So
All right, so we had an eclipse, we had an earthquake on the East Coast, and you had some rumbling yesterday down in Martinsville. The 0.526 mile track, I'm sure, was full of thunder and all kinds of tumult. And what a day for Hendrick Motorsports. And a place that is. I loved your story, the way you led the story. Take us into why this was. I mean, why William Byron's win and them taking all three spots on the podium was so, I guess, poetic, given the history of Hendrick there at Martinsville.
well, it's one of those things, Jeff Gordon said it right after the race. He said you couldn't have scripted it better. And almost immediately all of us in the media center just went, like scripted, because this is all happening at Martinsville. This is a place that's special in, Rick Hendrick's heart and so forth. And there's so many different storylines with it. And one thing that I did fail to mention in the story, and it was a reason for celebration, I guess, more than anything yesterday. But back in 1984, when Rick Hendrick was bankrolling, trying to get his all-star racing team started, they were about to fold up. They were about to close up shop, and Rick Hendrick was one of these people. He did not like to fail for any reason whatsoever, but the writing was on the wall. It just did not appear that they were going to be able to hold on. But Harry Hyde and some of these other people that Rick Hendrick had gotten involved with said, "Hey, said, let's give Martinsville a shot. Let's see what happens. And Rick Hendrick kind of, I wouldn't say reluctantly, but he just said, okay, let's try it and see what happens. And they came out victorious with Jeff Bodine, a Yankee, and from Chemung, New York, winning that race. And it started this rolling, ball rolling all the way down to where we are today. And that was, 40th anniversary. This was the one. This was the one race that Hendrick, if somebody had gone back in time and stopped them from happening, we wouldn't be where we are. Over 300 victories for this race team altogether. I mean, William Byron had picked up the win 300 for the program itself back in Texas last year. So many different variables with this whole thing. And we also have to point out, too, I didn't say anything in the story about it, but this place kind of holds a special significance in Rick Hendrick's heart because one of the first things that you see when you get off the elevator going to the press box in the media center, the press box up in the turn 1 and turn 2 there at Martinsville, is the fact that you see two huge rooms that are sponsored by Rick Hendrick. And they are sponsored. They have, bring all their people in, they bring their dignitaries in and so forth. And yesterday, it wasn't just dignitaries and people like that Rick Hendrick was wanting to impress and everything. This was almost 2,000 people that they brought of, the employees of Hendrick Motorsports and all the Hendrick companies and their families. They brought them up there for a weekend, brought them in on like 8 charter buses, I think is what somebody told me. And then some of them, drove in and so forth. But this thing about being special and almost, heartbreaking is the fact that his son lost his life there just outside of Martinsville at the Blue Ridge Airport, coming up short here several years ago. Fog hit, or they flew into the side of the mountain, and Ricky Hendrick was supposed to be, ironically, in that 24 car. He was supposed to take over in that 24 car when Chase Elliott first started driving it. And then, of course, Chase Elliott moved into that. And then after that, we had William Byron, who ends up, by the way, winning this race. And I think yesterday it was one thing when my son Andrew messaged me he was in the pits and I was up in the press box, and he said, "Are you watching Byron?" He said, "Byron is coming through the field." And he saw it. I mean, he saw it. I saw a little bit of it, but I was more concerned with what was going on at the front of the pack. And still, we haven't got over this whole thing of restart gate yet. We haven't got over this. There's always been, I guess for the last 2 weeks, there's been such a big brouhaha over this. We were just wondering, was something like this going to happen again? So there was a lot of variables going on Sunday afternoon at Martinsville.
Well, take us into that. Yeah, let's go. Let's start. Go back there. We've talked about the finish, but how do we get there?
Well, we got there from the fact of Kyle Larson going and, well, knocking Bubba Wallace off the pole. Bubba Wallace had the pole there for a long time. And then Kyle Larson comes up and Wallace is just like, can't believe this. This is the guy that, I hit, knocked out of the race here a week or so ago. And now he beats me on starting off at the starting grid. And then we go through what to me is kind of some, I wouldn't say boring exactly, but it was typical Martinsville racing. I think the thing that surprised me was at first, Kyle Larson had led there for a while. Then Joey Logano, of all things, decides to pit and then picks up just 2 left side tires. And we were all sitting there scratching our heads wondering, why in the devil did he take just 2 tires? Why didn't he take 4 tires on this? He drove 180 laps, probably pushed it a little bit too far, but he did lead part of the race. But here was the thing. He wore those tires out, but he also proved that by strategy, using those left side tires, some of the other teams would catch on to what he was doing and say, hey, I think Logano and them are on to something. Maybe if we have to, we can, instead of going to 4 tires, we can maybe go with just 2 left side tires, and we can maybe hold on to this track advantage all the way through. We saw some moves, some changes. Chase Elliott got to the front. Thought there for a while Chase Elliott was going to run away with this. He was running away from Denny Hamlin, just complete, I mean, almost the half of the length of the straightaways. And then Chase Elliott kind of faded off, and then out of nowhere, here comes Byron. Byron just starts picking off, and then he gets to the front, and barring a last lap or a couple of laps, John Hunter Nemechek blowing a tire there. Um, Chris, I hate to say this. I told somebody just kidding in the press box. I said, William Byron, if he loses this race, it will be a yellow and a caution with probably a couple laps to go, and it'll probably be caused by a Toyota. And sure enough, it was caused by a Toyota. And he ends up, fortunately, I guess, for the Hendrick organization, pulling off that big win.
Yeah, it's the second straight week we had
Yeah.
a wreck on the second to last lap that could, in this case, could have impacted the finish.
Right.
Last week it did impact the finish. And I know last week there were people discussing the conspiracy theory of, well, maybe that wasn't an accident. Maybe that was maybe it was something else.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, it does lead for an exciting finish for NASCAR. And so you mentioned Bubba Wallace. He had a good run. Talk about who else had some good runs yesterday.
Well, the Hendrick cars, as you mentioned, one, two, and three. First time that's ever happened at Martinsville Speedway in 151 races. Never happened at Martinsville at any other time, but Hendrick clearly dominated. Bowman had said, Alex Bowman, who drives the 48 car, he said he could have been in the mix if it hadn't been for some lap traffic. And that's one thing I wanted to talk about, too. That's seemed to be a big problem yesterday for a lot of these drivers. Chase Elliott was one, Denny Hamlin was another. Chase Elliott, it seemed like at times you had Chevrolet teams and some other teams holding up Chase Elliott. And then when that happens, that brings Denny Hamlin just closer and closer to getting on your bumper. And he's having to pick through the traffic. It seemed like that was one thing. And then the other was when Denny Hamlin was coming up on this lap traffic, they got out of his way. Now, I don't know if that was my son said this. He said, well, it's Chase Elliott. They think, Chase Elliott's not going to go and he's not going to shove anybody out of the way and push anybody out of the way. But if it's Denny Hamlin, yeah, get out of the way or get wrecked. One way or the other is kind of the way they talked about it. But yeah, Bubba Wallace had. I have to really brag on Bubba Wallace for this in this portion of the podcast because he ran a clean race. He ran a clean race that, and I mean, didn't really pick anything with anybody. He wasn't like, hitting people to knock them all over the track. He was just consistent all afternoon, consistent. And, I would have thought that probably maybe above, where his finishing point was, I would have expected at least maybe a second or third out of it in this case. But man, he was just so consistent yesterday. And he is just, to me, I think for one thing in my life, I think I'm seeing some maturity out of Bubba Wallace a little bit more. He just seems to be going out there just to get the job done. And maybe Michael Jordan's, had a talk with him and got a hold of him. I don't know, but he ran probably one of the best races I watched of his career since, going back to NASCAR and covering it.
You talked about Hamlin. I think, what didn't he do? Go to four tires
Yeah.
before the overtime, and that he restarted 10th, finished 11th.
Yeah.
Otherwise, had a pretty good day. And so for William Byron, third win of the season already. We're
Hmm.
only early April. That's
Yeah.
he's off to a really hot start to say the least.
Yes, he is. Three races, three wins for him. 8 races total so far on the season. Going to Texas next week. Bringing up the thing about Denny Hamlin. Hamlin did have a good race, also, like you mentioned, but I don't know what it was there toward the end of it. There was something that was said on the radio of where they made a comment, do the opposite of what everybody does one way or the other. That was for Denny Hamlin and his team. Chris Gabehart and them had kind of issued this little thing of saying, let's do the opposite. So, if Byron had came in and pitted, they were going to stay out on the track. Byron didn't pit, so they pitted and came in off the track and got 4 tires. That changed the race dramatically right there at that point. He had no chance of being able to get up there toward the front when that happened. And trying to at least contend for the win. But Denny Hamlin right now is, gosh, Chris, if I can try to explain it in the right way, there's this, you remember the little Peanuts character that would go and the little cloud would be hovering over his head all the time when he'd walk around? This restart thing is hovering over Denny Hamlin's head so much he's not making a big thing about it, but he has put NASCAR in such a position. I think I commented on this on the thread yesterday during the Facebook coverage. It's like he has opened up Pandora's box, and NASCAR now is forced into this situation of you've got to punish everybody that jumps a restart now from here on out. And then the question is going to be, why didn't you penalize Denny Hamlin for that? And so we're in that situation. I came up with the nickname. I started calling him this because Clint Boyer said on the telecast yesterday in the pre-race, he was talking about this being almost very similar to baseball. And I just turned around and I started calling him Balls and Strikes Denny, because it's arguing, what it is. How do you justify what's the restart zone? And then you go back and you see video of it from Martin Truex Jr.'s point of view. He clearly jumped the restart, but NASCAR did not. Is there something that Denny Hamlin has on NASCAR right now at this point of where he feels like he can do this and get by with it? I don't know, but it's definitely put NASCAR in a real pinch right now. So they have to be on their toes the rest of the season, and they have to call this right, or otherwise the legitimacy out of this thing is going to be totally all wrong, especially down toward the end of the race, like what happened here a couple of weeks ago with Hamlin and that restart at Richmond.
So you were also at Martinsville for Saturday's Xfinity race. So
Yeah.
give us some of the highlights of that race.
That race was probably a little bit more exciting, I think, in this case, than the Cup race on Sunday. And it was because Aric Almirola, who had really stepped away from NASCAR, and he had said at one point, he said, "I think I'm going to retire." He came back in a sort of a consultant capacity for Joe Gibbs Racing, and that's where he kind of began his racing time when he first started out. And he went out there, and I'm going to just tell you, he absolutely had the race of a lifetime. And he came up after the end of the race, and he was just, giving praise and thanks, kudos to everybody for everything for what they'd done, and especially Joe Gibbs for calling him up and still giving him the opportunity to kind of scratch that itch of racing, as he put it. But it was some good racing in that one altogether. For Joe Gibbs Racing, this was a big win and stuff, because the first win that he ever got had an asterisk beside of it, because of all things, he was the one that started for a race over Denny Hamlin in 2007. And then Denny Hamlin got to the race, turned around, they switched him out there at Milwaukee, and then put Hamlin into the car. Hamlin wins the race. But they put an asterisk beside because Aric Almirola started the car essentially and got the credit for the victory out of it for the driver of record. But still, there was that thing that was bothering him so bad. Now he said it's kind of gives him some legitimacy out of it. But I tell you, Sam Mayer, he raced a great race. Sheldon Creed had a lot of problems last year with Richard Childress Racing, Austin Hill and him teammates. I'll tell you, Sheldon Creed is a racer. He hasn't won anything just yet, but they were going back and forth, even with teammates, and Chandler Smith in there. They all got involved in this melee as they were going there toward the very end of the race. And Mayer, who got the top spot away from Aric Almirola on lap 243, was talking about the restarts. They were just ruthless there at Martinsville. They were just having so much of a hard time trying to get started on these restarts. Somebody would, slip the clutch, something about the gear, obviously miss a gear or something. And we had some big wrecks in that Xfinity race on Saturday night. It was well worth it, but still, I got to see some great racing out of this one. New Zealander too, Shane van Gisbergen. For his first trip to Martinsville, he hung around and finished in the top 15, finished 11th. So he got a at least a welcome to short track racing at Martinsville. So I guess we can see him back before long. He had several others in here too that raced really well. Cole Custer racing for Stuart Haas, he finished 8th. And looking at some of the others, Justin Allgaier, he had a chance at winning this race driving for JR Motorsports, and he finishes 5th. JR Motorsports, the surprising thing about it, winless on the 2024 season so far. So there's some people scratching their heads at JR Motorsports wondering what in the heck's going on with this program when they have been one of the dominant sort of teams on the Xfinity Series here over the last several years.
So getting away from the results, I know we talked about this in the last couple of podcasts. This was your first trip to Martinsville. You've been covering
Yeah.
NASCAR for us for several years, covering NASCAR and short track racing in Southwest Virginia for a long time. This is your first trip to Martinsville. I want to get your
Mm-hmm.
impressions of what racing there was like.
Small.
Uh-huh.
I mean, there's no. I took a step into the infield at Martinsville. Found out it was just not where I wanted to be yet. Everything was so compressed. It was more so compressed as what it was at Bristol. Bristol, at least you have a little bit of room to move around. Andrew was saying over and over a couple of times, he says, I don't know if I want to be down here this much. He says, with everything going on, it would be just like me to be walking down through here and then somebody pull into the pits and something go wrong with the car and then run me over, because he said it's that tight down in there. The track, oh, I was definitely floored by the track. The front and the back stretch, exactly what I thought. But when I walked into the infield, I saw you don't see it on television. You don't see it as much on television as you do in real life. But when you're there at that track, you see an incline in that track, especially in 3 and 4 and 1 and 2. And we found out, I think my son found out probably more than anything from the race. It's a very hard track to shoot photographs from. He got some good pictures that I'll be sharing with you a little bit later. But still, it's hard track to shoot with and shoot from. In some places, he did find a good couple of places. All in all, it was great. I just, the walking was a little bit much on me this time around. Bristol takes care of you. Bristol will run a shuttle. We were still kind of on the side of the road, kind of doing this, hoping a shuttle would pick us up
Uh-huh.
and
Uh-huh.
take us back to the parking area. But other than that, it was a great experience. I'm looking forward to it. I first thought, I don't know if I'll go back in the fall, but considering that it's a playoff race and so forth, I may very well go back in the fall and see what the difference is between the spring race and the fall race. I did not have one of the hot dogs though.
No, no. Oh, come on, no hot dogs.
I did not have a chance to have one of the hot dogs. I thought about it. They were $2. Andrew tried one of them. He said, "Hmm, they're they were okay." I said, "But they're supposed to be world famous." He said, "Well, world famous in my book, eh? They could have probably done some things with him." So now he's a picky eater too. So I mean, I looked at him and I thought to myself, yeah, I was going to try one, and then I just thought that day, I said, no, nah, this has been kind of a stressful kind of day getting down here, kind of getting things set up on Saturday. I said, I think I'm going to pass. And Sunday, I really didn't, but hey, they took care of us in the press box and stuff. Some great food up
Okay.
there, no doubt about it. But hospitality, NASCAR, there's a difference with the tracks, and I saw this for once. Speedway Motorsports and their tracks, of course, Bristol, Charlotte, and some of the other tracks. Uh, they are just on top of things. They are very centered on trying to help the media out as much as possible, getting that good word out there. On the flip side of that, International Speedway Corporation, which owns Martinsville, Clay Campbell is, of course, the president. They produce just incredible amounts of information all at once. You don't really have that much of a dealing with some of the people because they are being stretched and pulled so many different directions from maybe some of the car owners, some of the teams, and different things like that with what they have to do. So it was kind of a difference in daylight and dark. I wouldn't say it was a bad experience with it whatsoever. Gosh, I know exactly what one person that I know had sent on the feed earlier. I think on one of my threads, it said something about they loved Martinsville, they hated the traffic. And we found out about the traffic leaving yesterday afternoon and stuff, and it was they got us out. They got us out pretty well and so forth, but it was a free for all for everybody trying to get out of the track. Nobody really wants to kind of just pause there for a minute and just take a deep breath. It's like, let's get out of here. So that's the way they were. So
They've been watching racing for hours. They want to they want to
yeah,
practice what they've been watching there all that time. No,
yeah.
what you talked about with the difference in the approaches from a media perspective kind of
Hmm.
reminds me of, I was just at the ACC tournament in basketball, and then the next week I was at the NCAA tournament, and I have to give the NCAA credit. It was a lot better working with the NCAA than it was the ACC. Like I'm
Hmm.
a lifetime better as far as I was
Hmm.
concerned. So kind of interesting to see how, you think it would just people who are listening to this would just assume that we get treated the same way and probably get treated great everywhere we go. But not to say it wasn't great. It was
Right.
different. And for me, the NCAA was just a lot better. Um, so I got to ask you this as we're getting ready to wrap up. You're down there in the tri-states area. We talk a lot about stuff going on with Tennessee as things come up, but boy, there's some news coming out of Kentucky. What have you been hearing down your way today with the news about John Calipari heading to Arkansas, leaving UK for Arkansas?
Good riddance. That's the way they're acting. I've got, I don't know how many friends that I know one that I work with at the high school, and she is a huge Kentucky fan. And I came up to her this morning as I was getting ready to go on to my planning period. And I said to her, I said, what'd you think about the news? And it was sort of like she didn't say it exactly in those terms, but it was like, thank God they got rid of him. He's gone, and it's like, I was shocked. I mean, when I got home last night, and I got home probably 12:15 or 12:30, and I look and I just said, I'm going to look at the phone here right quick. Breaking news. John Calipari is in the process of leaving Kentucky and going to Arkansas. And I'm like, well, if he couldn't corrupt the program at Kentucky that much, he's going to really do a great job of it at Arkansas when he gets down there. Hey, did you see that the one thing that the big alumni, the one of the big givers, is actually going to be able to cover what Kentucky is going to have to, about the payout and so forth, about what's left. They're actually going to be able to cover that, so he won't have to worry about having to come up with that money and so forth, for Kentucky of where he's leaving to go somewhere else. But, that was one big thing. I'm kind of left with the other of say what on Tennessee. And that was the young lady that was named the head coach of Tennessee caught me off guard completely. I was like, okay, they're going to go for somebody else. They were thinking about Jeff Walls at Louisville at one point, couple of others. Carol Lawson had taken her name out at Duke, which rightly so. I think it was probably some time for some new blood in there, but this girl came out of nowhere, and I don't mean to in any way say calling her a girl, but this woman just it kind of knocked me out of the ballpark. I was like, "You got to be kidding! Who is this?" Then
Yeah,
when I
one
started reading her records, oh my gosh, I was impressed. So
But 1 year at Marshall, and then jumping around like that, I almost think that Tennessee made that move to get rid of Kelly Harper, and then they thought they had somebody lined
yeah,
up, and then that person didn't jump when they thought they were coming. So
I agree with that. That's what I think. I think there were some people. I'm going to be honest about this. Tennessee, especially the Lady Vol program, is not a program that you can just wake up tomorrow morning, you get up out of the bed and say, I think I am great. Therefore, I am going to coach women's basketball at Tennessee. You just cannot do that because there is so much, how can I say this, pageantry? There's so much tradition and everything else. I feel sorry for anybody that goes into that program and is going to try to coach. The reason being is the fans are still along this line, the same thing of she's not Pat Summit. There'll never be another Pat Summit. I can't say it enough. There'll never be another one. I thought Kelly Harper had done a good job. I'm not saying great. I thought she had done a good job, but considering what she had coming back, there was a good possibility with this that she might have been able to build something really good next year and have something to contend with. The same thing goes for Kenny Brooks at Tech and then jumping to go to Kentucky. I think there's a lot of people that was just really surprised by that. It kind of shows me the difference on some of the top levels where the money is at and so forth. $750,000 in a year. I think, and 5-year contract. I think it's going to total out something somewhere in the neighborhood. She stands, making so much. I forget how much with all of her job
Incentives.
stuff and things
Yeah.
like that, incentives and so forth. But gosh, I mean, it just like it caught me off guard. But um, uh, local ties, there was one team down here, UVA Wise, that once they were a member of the Mountain East Conference, and they defeated one of her Glenville State teams when she was coaching up there. She was 5-1 against UVA Wise, and that one loss, Jamie Klusman, who is the head coach now at UVA Wise. Oh man, they ran circles all over her that night in that particular game. So, I don't know. Maybe Danny White thought that this was going to be a hire, much like Josh Heupel, even though he knew what Josh Heupel could do. A lot of people didn't know who Josh Heupel was coming out of Central Florida or whatever it was at the time. People in the Midwest had heard of him with Oklahoma because he had been a quarterback at one time. But when he came to Tennessee, I was like, who? And he kind of has removed that. Now, if she can hit the ground running and she can keep some of these, recruits and stuff, I know that one has already said openly she's welcome, or she is welcome to be recruited again by Tennessee and see what the coach is going to offer. But she's already dropped where she was going to sign with Tennessee with Kelly Harper. So a lot of changes going on in college basketball, even before tonight's championship. We have no idea who's going to be at Kentucky. I mean, there's talk everywhere. Who's going to be at Kentucky? Kenny Payne? Does Kenny Payne leave after he walks with his tail between his legs from Louisville and goes back into Kentucky? Who's going to go there? Somebody asked me, said, "What about Tony Bennett? You think he'd leave Virginia?" I'm like, no. There's no.
Well,
I
and
mean, it's
I
not
wrote a
going to work.
I wrote a column on that too. Kentucky wouldn't have the patience to have Tony Bennett there. His
No.
system takes a couple years to develop. I'm
Yeah.
reading Billy Donovan,
Yeah. I've heard that.
attempt to lure him back. Now that he would have to be leaving the
Hmm.
NBA. Kentucky's got the money to make that happen.
Yeah.
Also, the wish list would include Jay Wright.
Hmm.
I mean, it's a wish list. It's Kentucky. It's the biggest
Yeah.
job in college basketball. They can shoot higher, but boy, you talked about Calipari. That Walmart money is what lured him down there. That and
Hmm.
hey, they're getting ready to run me out of town here. What if I just run myself out of town,
Yeah.
and beat all the people with the pitchforks and the and the fire. So
This
let's
is no different than Patino leaving and going to, and then going to Louisville after this. There's
yeah.
there's no difference with this. And
Hey, I've
then
seen Patino's name associated with
yes.
this job.
And Patino said he would be willing to come back to Kentucky. And I'm like, oh my gosh. That was and if Jay Wright decides to go to Kentucky, I'll tell you one thing, he'll keep things going there. He'll be one of the best dressed Kentucky coaches we've ever seen. I mean, he's got a presence on the sideline. That's just me. I first did not like him at Villanova, but gosh, he produces winners. He was producing winners year in and year out. They were always in the tournament. I think that would be good. Now, that's going to be the big question. Kentucky has to get rid of this one and done stuff. That's what has killed Kentucky over the years, especially with Calipari. And
Yeah.
that's been you recruit this class in, you get them in, they play 1 year, and then they take off and go to the NBA, and then you don't hear from them, that much, or they just don't, they fall through the cracks somewhere. And you want a team to have some kind of cohesion, to be able to stick together, to be able to play. Kentucky showed that at times this year. Some of these guys had stuck around a little bit longer, but when you had, what was it, freshman of the year, Reed Shepherd, and then Reed Shepherd ends up, oh man, when they lost and he broke down crying, they said he was crying like a baby that night, because that's not the way that a Kentucky team should end their season. They shouldn't be ending their season the way that they did. And I think there were a lot of people in the Commonwealth. I've got relatives that are big Kentucky fans. They are big Kentucky fans, and I've got a relative too that's a big Duke fan. And they'd even talked about even when if the matchup ever happened again of Duke versus Kentucky, I have a cousin that says it's got a T-shirt that says "I still hate Leitner," and they'll go, and every time if the camera shows, they pull the shirt up, and right there it is. I still hate Leitner. So that's what they're hoping for, but I don't know. It is so topsy turvy right now with things. Gosh, it's kind of hard to believe with all this stuff going on in college basketball, and then thinking everybody was so upset and wondering what the heck is Austin Dillon and Richard Childress, his grandfather, doing about switching out crew chiefs coming into this week, going into Martinsville, and they still didn't do well. So I don't know. I don't know if it's going to be the crew chief or if it's the driver or what the situation may be. But Richard Childress not very happy right now, and he's not found the solution just yet for him or for Kyle Busch either. Kyle Busch not having a good 8 races so far into the season.
There's enough to keep us talking. That's the important
Yep.
thing. Whether it's NASCAR, college basketball, eclipses, plagues of frogs, whatever the case.
Balls and strikes, Denny.
There we go.
Yeah, that's my new phrase for him. It's going to be every time if we lead in, you tell me, you say, "Well, Denny Hamlin won another race." Yeah, balls and strikes, any way you want to call it. You call it high, I call it low. Well, it was in the dirt, but it looked good. Balls and strikes, Denny. Balls and strikes.
I'll remember that one for the next time. Hey, Rod, as always, thank you for your time and your insight.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Chris.